Okay, so let's review what we were looking at here. We were looking at the Keynesian model. And we had something that kind of looked like this. So we had our basically nominal GDP here. I'm just going to call it output. And we had our aggregate expenditures here, right? We have our 45-degree line. And we have some level of aggregate expenditures. And at this level of aggregate expenditures, we know that in the Keynesian model, we're going to come up to an equilibrium where these aggregate expenditures are equal to output, right? Because if we're at an output level less than that and aggregate expenditures are greater than that, then we're going to have dis-saving. If we're at a point greater than that, you're going to have savings, right? So that in essence, what's occurring in here at output levels less than Y1 here, firms are going to see dis-saving. They're going to see a decline in their inventories. That's going to be a signal to them to start making more. If we go beyond Y1, they would see savings. They would see inventories increasing. That would be a sign to them to actually start making less. Now, what we said was the problem was, what happens if YF is up here somewhere? Okay. So how do we get to YF if we're at Y1? Because there's no reason for anybody to alter their behavior. That's what the Keynesian model says. We know that we're in a recession here at Y1, but wages and prices are unlikely to fall in Keynes's mind, are unlikely to fall. And if they do fall, it's in the long run, not the short run. So he said, well, what we could in essence do is we need to find some way to increase aggregate demand up here to say AE2, and we can do that by changing either some of these autonomous components or changing basically this marginal propensity to consume or the marginal propensity to import, right? And like we said, the easiest thing to do, and by easy I mean relatively easy. None of its stuff is easy. It's all hard. But some of it's relatively easier to do than others, is to change government spending, right? To, in essence, basically increase government spending or decrease government spending, and consequently by that, increase taxes or decrease taxes. Those are going to have the exact same result in terms of changing this aggregate expenditure. So the interesting thing here, though, is that you don't actually need a large increase here. So this guy right here and this guy right here, this guy is smaller. So here's our change in, say, aggregate expenditures. And we're going to say that this is, in essence, a change in G. And here is our change in income, right? And what happens is that we get this change in government expenditures, or this change in our aggregate expenditures. It could be anything. I'm just using the change in government expenditures as an example to create this larger change in output, right? And we get this to what is something that's called the multiplier effect. All right, so let's look at what this guy looks like. Let's assume we're just looking at consumption and output. There's nothing else. And let's assume that the marginal propensity to consume is 9. Okay. So here we are, we're at some consumption. We have some output here, right? If we have, for example, say a $100 increase in income, what this guy says is that we're going to have some change here. I'm going to flip these around, actually. Let's call this additional. Additional consumption. We're going to have some change here of, say, 100. We don't know where this $100 came from. It just comes from somewhere. Wow. And what this guy says is that people are going to spend 90% of this, right? So what we see here is that consumption goes up by basically 90. Now here's what's interesting, right? We've got this additional $100 in income. They're going to go out and they're going to spend $90. But when they're consuming these dollars, that's somebody else's income, right? So the $90 that they spend on haircuts and movie tickets and food, well, that's how the barber and the guy that works at the movie theater and the farmer earn income, right? You're buying their food, you're buying their movie tickets, and you're buying their haircut. So in essence, their income has gone up by 90. Now, if the barber's income has gone up by 90 and he spends 90, his consumption is going to go up, right? Say 81. And so he spends his $81 on, whatever it could be, I don't know, kitchen cabinets, right? So now he spent $81 on kitchen cabinets, but the money that he's spending on his kitchen cabinets, to him, to the barber, is consumption. But to the guy that makes kitchen cabinets, it's income. It comes down here as be 81, right? So now the kitchen cabinet guy has seen his income grow by $81, and he spends 90%. So he'll spend basically 73, and there's obviously period such and such and such, right? But we don't want to get into all that. So the kitchen cabinet guy spends $73 fixing his car, all right? So he's buying his car getting fixed up, but to the guy that's fixing up his car, the $73 isn't consumption, it's income. Right? So now the guy that has his car fixed, he's going to spend 90 cents or 90% of his income, right? So he's going to spend $65 on, I don't know, hiring somebody to trim his trees, right? So the $65 that he's spending on hiring somebody to trim his trees, to the guy that does cars, that's consumption, but to the guy that trims trees, that's his income. Right? And on and on and on down we go, right? And interestingly enough, when you add all this up, you're going to see here that income has grown by, in this example, 1,000. This 100 plus this 90 plus this 81 plus this 70 plus this 65 plus 59 all the way down until we get down to 0. We've seen income grow by 1,000. And of course, this means we will have seen additional consumption grow by 900. All right? So we have this multiplier that tells us how much a change in these aggregate expenditures is going to change output. And you can see it in a couple of different ways. You can see it is this. Let's ignore the import stuff. Let's just look at the consumption part. Here's our output. Here's our aggregate expenditures. Here's our 45-degree line. Here's one AE line. Call this Y1. And we'll have some corresponding change here. AE2. Y2. So here's the change in aggregate expenditures. Here's the change in output. This guy right here is smaller than this guy. But if we make this guy steeper, right? If we make this aggregate expenditure line steeper, let's have the exact same thing here. AE1, AE2. I'll call this, say, Y3. I'll call this guy, say, Y4. It's the same change here. But we have a much larger change in income, right? Depends upon the slope of this marginal propensity to consume. We know that income is RC plus I plus G plus X minus M, right? And we know what C is. C was A plus BY. We know what I is. I was IO. We know what G is. G was GO. We know what X is. X was XO. We know what M is. M was, we called it little m plus MY, right? I'll just call it like with a little bar there or whatever. It can be anything. All you got to do is plug and chug. Plug in the numbers, chug out the answer. Right? We know that this is occurring. We've taken these guys right here and just plugged them into here. And now all we got to do is get like terms together. Right? So we've got our Y here. A plus IO plus GO plus XO minus M, right? Minus this M bar Y plus BY, right? But these guys can come over here. Y plus M Y minus BY equals A plus IO plus GO plus XO minus M. Remember, M here is autonomous imports. This little M bar right here is our marginal propensity to import. You factor out the Y. Right? And divide by this guy right here. So we see that output here is equal to our autonomous consumption plus IO plus GO plus XO minus M, this autonomous level of imports, divided by 1 plus M minus B. Right? But remember, the MPS and the MPC are equal to 1. So the negative of negative B is the marginal propensity to import. Or to save, I mean. Strike that. That should be negative. Strike that. So we've got these autonomous components here. We can change any of those guys. It's easiest to change G, but we want to know, well, what's going to be the size of that multiplier? You don't have to know all the algebra. But you do have to know the multiplier, right? So that you see here that for every single one of these changes, right? If our marginal propensity to consume is 0.9, and like I said, let's ignore the marginal propensity to import. Let's assume it's equal to 0. It's 1 over 1 minus 0.9, right? It's 1 over 0.1. Well, 1 over 0.1 is 10. Every single dollar that you change here gets you a $10 change. As opposed to, say, if the marginal propensity to consume was, say, 0.5, should be 2, right? Every single dollar that you change here, bless you, brings in $2 more. So what this guy says is that if we know these numbers, if we know this guy, if we know this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, we know this and this, you can set this guy right here, G, to be any number that you want it to be to make Y be any number that you want it to be. So that if you know, oh, look, the marginal propensity to consume is 0.5. Oh, look, the marginal propensity to consume is 0.9. And I want to get here to say Y4. I want to get to any number. It can be any number that you want to get to. Let's use blue. If I'm here, on this line right here, this aggregate expenditure line with this marginal propensity to consume equal to 0.5, and I want to get up here to 0.4, I can know exactly how much a change in these aggregate expenditures I need to have to get to that point. In other words, what Keynes is saying is that we can micromanage the economy in such a way that if we know these numbers, our marginal propensity to consume, our marginal propensity to import, the amount of investment and exports and all this other kind of stuff, you can be anywhere. There's no reason to ever have a recession again. If you have a recession, you just change government spending, or you change taxes, or you get people to change investment, or you get exports to change, or you get A to change, or whatever. You just do it. The problem is that it's harder to do those things, so it's easier to change G, so he says just change G. If the economy is doing the exact opposite, if it's too high, you just cut G. So if we're at this point right here, here's our output. Here's our aggregate expenditures. Here's our 45-degree line. If we're here, we're at AE1, we're at Y1, and we want to be here, we want to be at YF. Here's the full employment level of output. Well, you just decrease government spending, right? Or increase taxes by some amount, this amount, whatever it is here, delta G. And you can get this delta Y to get you to YF, the full employment level of output. You can just set it like you would your microwave. You just set the clock to be whatever it is that you want it to be. Now, from a practical political standpoint, is it easy to cut government spending? No. Right? And that was one of his, in my opinion, one of his big mistakes. Because he says, well, look, we can just change government spending to get to this level of output that we want to. It's easy to spend more money and give people stuff. It's hard to take stuff away. To say, well, we don't really have, we need to decrease government spending. No more subsidizing higher education. You guys pay the full cost now. right? So not whatever it was Missouri State charged, $200 an hour? Is that right? Is that what you guys pay? The reason you pay $200 an hour, is that what it is? I don't know what it is. 130? I don't remember. 100? You guys don't even know, do you? Let's assume it's 100. If it's $100 an hour, it doesn't really cost $100 an hour. It costs like $400 an hour, right? And the other $300 are being subsidized by the state. Just change G. So let's assume they just said, screw it, we don't really have the money. We want to make the economy not be at Y1, we want to be at YF. We're going to cut G. No more $100 an hour for MSU students. Now they're going to pay $350 an hour. How would that go over?
I mean, I drop out.
Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, in essence, this is what would happen, right? No more spending on Medicaid, no more highways, no more whatever, right? People aren't going to go for that. It's easy to do this. It's really, really hard to do that, right? So from that aspect, his model, it works well algebraically. But from a practical political standpoint, once you get that increased government spending, you just can't get rid of it. So it's easy to increase G. It's really, really hard to cut G. So let's look at his model in a couple of different ways. Remember, he's a demand-driven guy. So here's our output. Here's our 45-degree line. Here's aggregate expenditures. AE1. Let's assume this is just some number. This is whatever number we want it to be. 14 trillion. And the full employment level of outputs here, it's at, say, 18 trillion. So we know that we can do this, AE2, right? We know that this guy is our full employment level of output, YF. Here's Y1. Oh, we just have some change here in these aggregate expenditures, right? AE1, AE2. Why stop there? Why not go beyond that? Why not have $30 trillion? Why stop at 18? If we can set the economy to be anything that we want it to be, why stop at 18 trillion? Why not make it $30 trillion? Exactly. You got inflation, right? There is no long-run aggregate supply curve in this model. We're taking the long-run aggregate supply curve from the ADAS model and we're going to take it out and we're going to paste it into the Keynesian model. Remember, the LRAS here is a real. This is from the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. Remember, output here in the Keynesian model was nominal. So you can have $30 trillion in output if you want to. But in real amounts of output, what do you have? 18 trillion. It hasn't changed, right? You're essentially at this guy right here. So when you go this way, you've got inflation, but no unemployment. When you go this way, you've got unemployment, but no inflation. right? And you can take the Keynesian idea, let's take Keynes's model, and stick it in the ADAS model. Just like we took part of the ADAS model and stuck in the Keynesian model, let's take the Keynesian model and stick it in the ADAS just for comparison. So here is our real output. Here's our price index. So if all of the assumptions of the Keynesian model are correct, and we take those assumptions and we look at them through the ADAS model, we're going to have a short-run aggregate supply curve that looks like this. All right, and we'll have our long-run aggregate supply curve that goes right here. And then we've got these changes here in aggregate demand. So here's 81, here's 82, here's 83. Y1, Y2, Y3, all right? And we can have these changes in aggregate demand. If we're at some output level, say Y1, what Keynes says is, hey, we need to find a way to increase aggregate demand. We need to find a way to change, it's what we're going to call it fiscal policy here in about 10 minutes. We're going to have these changes in fiscal policy. We're going to change government spending or taxes to make aggregate demand increase. And we can make it increase to this, and we can make it increase to that. We can make it increase from 81 all the way up here to 83. And we'll see no change in the price index. Inflation won't exist at all till we get up to Y3. And then if we have additional changes in aggregate demand, we won't get any increases in real output. We'll just get the price index. So maybe here it was 210, and here it's 240 or whatever. And this change in the price index means that there's inflation. That's what the price index tells. Changes in the price index tell you rates of inflation. Now, the problem is, and this is where we've gotten away from the Keynesian model, is that this model, in essence, says you can't have both inflation and unemployment at the same time. And clearly, we've had uninflation and unemployment at the same time. Right? We had that during the 70s. So people were all, ADAS model is horrible, blah, blah, blah. We got the Keynesian model fixed out. We can essentially mathematically get to whatever level it is that we want to be. And then they're fine with that for a while, and then the 70s come along and they're like, holy crap, the Keynesian model says this can't exist. Keynesian model must not be perfectly right either. So, in short, we don't know what model is right when it comes to the macroeconomy. We really don't. And people that say that they do know are lying. They are simply wrong. We simply do not know. Your micro book, your Principles of Micro book, if you're taking Principles of Micro, you could get a book from 1905. The material has not changed. Right? Cost is a cost, revenue is a revenue, a price is a price. All that stuff hasn't changed. Macro, this stuff changes all the time. It just does. So we have different models, and different models explain different things in different parts, okay, but some things they don't explain very well. So we kind of have this kind of hybridization, and that's why you have all of these arguments about cutting taxes or not cutting taxes, or increasing government spending or not increasing government spending, or I don't know. I mean, all the stuff that we're arguing about today, right? It's all related because we kind of don't really know which model to use. So we're looking at these changes here in aggregate demand, and like we said, the easiest way to do this is through changes in G. And we've got basically two different types of policies that can lead to these changes. The first one is called fiscal policy, where we're looking at changes in taxes or spending by governments. The other one is monetary policy, where you're looking at changes in the money supply. And the key here for monetary policy that you're changing interest rates. And by changing interest rates, you change consumption and investment, right? If the interest rate's 12%, you're less likely to go out and buy a car than if the interest rate is 3%. If the interest rate to borrow is 12%, IBM is less likely to build the new factory than if the interest rate's 3%. So monetary policy can change the economy through essentially changes in consumption and investment, and to a smaller degree, changes in government spending. Fiscal policy says, let's look at these changes in taxes and spending, right? Because here, you're looking at changes in G, and to a degree, by changing taxes, you can change this guy, because we can make Y here, not just income, but we can make him income minus taxes. We can make him after-tax income. Right? We can always make the models more realistic if we want to, but they always become more complicated. Because now it's this guy, right? Now plug all that stuff back in and run it all through, and then you can include taxes on here if you want to. So we can change after-tax income, changing taxes. Or we can change government spending. Well, changing after-tax income is going to change consumption. Right? Changing marginal tax rates might change I. Once again, we've assumed here in this model that it's autonomous. Once you move on to like intermediate macro, you don't make that assumption anymore. This is just a simplifying assumption. Both of these guys are simplifying assumptions. Actually, all of these guys are. We can always make these guys more realistic, and they are. And the other models, much more complicated. Right? So let's look at this idea of fiscal policy. We're going to start off with it. And we're going to start off with a discussion basically of taxes. We've got a couple of different principles here that we're interested in. The benefit principle says people should be taxed. You're going to pay these taxes. Based upon the benefits you receive. All right? Whereas this ability to pay principle says people should pay taxes based upon their income levels. Now, they don't sound that different, but they're vastly different ideas. Because in essence, what the ability to pay principle says is that you can think of it like this. People that earn more income should pay more taxes. Does that seem fair? Yeah, sure. The benefit principle says receive a benefit, pay for it. Does that seem fair? Yeah. Here's two income levels. They're both receiving $5,000 in benefit. National defense. Everybody receives the exact same amount of national defense. What do you think? Take this out of government. Pay for stuff based upon the stuff you get. Should people get soda without paying for it? Does that seem fair? Cars, houses, food? Okay. So if they're getting $5,000 worth of benefit from national defense and they make $10,000 worth of income, they should pay $5,000 in taxes. Right? Here's the ability to pay principle. We're going to take this, the rich guy is going to pay all of it, the poor guy pays nothing. That's fine, except that now this guy is what? Well, we actually have a word for it. He's a free rider. So which do you choose? What type of question is this? Normative or positive? It's a normative issue. Because if you earn more income, do you have more ability to pay taxes? Yes. Okay, this sounds pretty good. Should people get stuff without paying for it? Okay, this one sounds good. So what do we do? $5,000 for both? Or $10,000 for this guy? Are there people here who think this is unfair? Are there people, I agree, there's at least one person here that thinks this is unfair. I'm telling you that there is, you're just not willing to raise your hand. Are there people here who think this is unfair? Totally. So which is fair? It's a normative issue. You cannot determine which is fair. And here's what's really, really interesting. The only way to make the tax system fair by any metric that you want to use, ability to pay, benefit principle, any principle that you use, is if two conditions are met. Everyone has identical income. Everyone has identical preferences. If both of those conditions are true, then you can devise a tax system that is fair. Right? Because if everyone has the same income but different preferences, I want these many fire stations. No, we don't need that many fire stations. We need this number of fire stations. I want this level of national defense. No, 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 no. We don't need that level of national defense. We need this level of national defense. Identical income, right? A household of 2 people and a household of 2 people. You can even make these households the same. Here's a mom and a kid. Here's old guy, old lady. I want lots of spending for K through 12 education because my kid's in K through 12. I don't want that. I don't have any kids in K through 12. Quit taxing me for these kids. I'm not going to be alive to see them grow up and do crap. Old people hate property taxes. Do you know why? Because it funds schools, and they don't want to fund schools. They don't have kids. They're like, why should I pay for this? One person's got $100,000, one person's got $10,000. Whichever way you do it, you're going to have a problem. So how often do we have a situation where everyone has identical income and everyone has identical preferences? Never. It never happens. So what is the probability of devising a tax system that is fair to everybody? It's 0. It's completely 0. All right? We'll pick it up from here on